This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to ask first if everybody will be sure to mute themselves. If not, we can mute on this end as well. I'll give you a minute to mute yourself, and we don't mind looking at some of you as well. If anybody wants to turn their video on, you're more than welcome to do that. In a few minutes, we'll be actually doing some screen sharing for most of our presentations today, but we're more than happy to greet you. But we'd like to welcome you to the Greene County Nonprofit ARPA application workshop. We really appreciate all of you being with us this afternoon, and we're looking forward to our time together. We really want this to be an engaging time. We want this to be fairly informal. And if you have questions, you can utilize the chat as we go through the afternoon. Skylar, I'm going to ask you to please mute everybody except for me. Thank you very much. So we can make sure that everybody can hear us as we go through the afternoon workshop. I know this is always awkward when we're doing virtual presentations, but we would love for a few of you to let us know that you're here by way of introduction. But first, we're going to introduce ourselves. My name is Lionel Foster, and I'm here at Greene County as a consultant for the ARPA program, and I'm going to let my teammates introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Skylar Crawford. I am a part of the Greene County American Rescue Plan team here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Meads. I'm also a team member and a student at Missouri State University this semester.
And I'm very grateful for our team members. They have been very much immersed in everything ARPA as part of this really interesting and very rewarding process this year. We've also got some other members from Greene County that are part of our virtual call this afternoon. They may say some things before the afternoon is over, but I certainly want to identify them. I know I see Cindy Stein, who's the Greene County Auditor, and we're really pleased for her to be with us. And if there are some technical assistance questions or we get into some deep conversations, I will certainly ask for her expertise, information, and knowledge as we go through the afternoon. I think I saw Jared Sloan, and I think I see Jeff, maybe some others that are on here. But anyhow, I know Cindy and Jared are with us from Greene County. If there's anybody else from Greene County, please identify yourself. There's a lot of names. I don't want to ignore you if you are here from Greene County. We have an internal ARPA team here at Greene County as well that are very instrumental in everything ARPA and our decision-making process for these programs. Okay, so if several of you in nonprofit land would like to say good afternoon, we certainly want to give a few seconds. Again, we want this to be an interactive process. So yes, we have a lot of information to share, but we also want this to be participatory. So if a few of you want to say hi and tell us what organization you're from and what you do there, we'd like to give a few minutes to do that at this time. Thank you for turning your screen, your cameras on. We want to see you. Thank you. And thank you for the chat as well. Well, I see some more faces. You might want to say hi.
Hey, Lyle, it's Julie Gurman. Remember me from last winter?
Yes, I do. Yes, good to see you. Good to see you. How are you?
I'm
Good.
great. I'm
Thank
just
you.
here helping Matt with the Ozark Pickleball Club is interested in working with the park board.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. I'd love a few more people to introduce themselves and your organizations as well, please.
Hello, everybody.
Go
My
ahead.
name is Colby Wallace. I work for Good Samaritan Boys Ranch.
Thank you for being with us today. Anybody else?
Hello, my name is Susan Cox. I work with Catholic Charities of Southern Missouri.
Thank you. Welcome. Someone else?
Hello, Dr. Foster. It's Jeff Smith from Salvation Army. I work with, obviously, the Salvation Army. I'm the Community Development Manager.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes?
I'm Shannon Porter. I'm with Empower Abilities here in Springfield.
Great.
Mary Cromrie, Ozark Greenways.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary.
Holly Wilson, Consumer Credit Counseling Service.
Hi, Holly. Good to see you.
Lisa Baker Inc., Springfield Sister Cities.
Thank you, Sister Cities. Great to have you on the call.
Sarah Markham,
Ben McBride.
That's fine. I know it's hard sometimes with this virtual arrangement to know who's going on first, but I know two of you tried to say hi and we appreciate it. Well, let me just say as we get started this afternoon, again, thank you for being part of our technical assistance virtual workshop today. And before we go into any of the information, I really want to just say to everybody, I want you to know that Greene County appreciates the work that you do in our community. The nonprofit community is extremely important to all of our community, to our citizens. And we do recognize that in the throes of the pandemic, you have been called upon to do the extraordinary, and you have met the challenge. And so we really do appreciate your work. I want you to know that that is our vantage, our perspective here. So we really appreciate you and for what you're doing in our community. And from the beginning, I want you to see that we see the nonprofit application program as really a specific opportunity to be able to assist you in some of the things you already are doing and other things you may identify as opportunities to respond to some of the challenges having been presented by the pandemic that are still ongoing within our community. And those of you that are still saying hi in the chat, thank you so much. We've got a lot of information. We're hoping to get this done in about an hour, but we also want to make sure that we cover all of your questions, so we will take as long a time frame as we need. So at this point, we're going to share the screen and go to our specific agenda. Again, thank you for being here. So we want to do a little bit of an overview of our ARPA program. So we had a workshop last week and we had about the same number of people. In fact, we may have a couple more of this afternoon, so we're glad that you're here. This is the second and the last workshop that we have formally planned, but we want you to know that technical assistance is available with our ARPA team. We're trying to set aside the time from 10 a.m. to noon each day that you can call our team, and they're available by phone, or you can email them. And then you can also set up an appointment time. That's the phone number as well as the email address if you want to send in a question. I know many of you don't always stop when the clock stops at 4:30 or 5 in the afternoon. You have a question while you're working on this in the evening, email us and we'll get back to you in the morning with a response. The workshop today, as you've heard, is already going to be recorded, and so that will also be available on the Greene County website under the Greene County ARPA tab. We'll make sure that you can find out how to get to our ARPA tab. I'm sure most of you have already been there because that's where you'll find the application. But last week's workshop as well as this workshop will both be available on the Greene County ARPA tab. Obviously, we want to acknowledge our Greene County Commission, Presiding Commissioner Bob Dixon, Rusty McLaughlin, Commissioner of 1st District, Commissioner Russell, Commissioner of the 2nd District. I just always want to say that these gentlemen are doing an amazing job as leaders in the Greene County community. I also want to emphasize that the nonprofit application program, as well as the small business program, which we've just about completed, these are not requirements of the ARPA legislation. These are initiatives that our county commissioners have wanted us to make available to our community as a way of using the ARPA dollars that Greene County has received to respond to the immediate needs. As part of my work here at the county, I've looked at what many other counties as well as municipalities across the nation are doing. Not every county, not every city has a nonprofit application process or a small business program. This is because they are very interested and very supportive of what you do and want to make sure that they can use some of the allocation, and we'll show you this on the slide as well, but to use some of the allocation that we have so that we can give these funds back out to support our community. And this again is just more of the Greene County ARPA team. Chris Coulter, many of you know him, our county administrator. Jeff Scott, the county budget officer. Cindy Stein, we've already acknowledged, is on our call today. Justin Hill, Greene County treasurer. Dave Kavner, who handles our information systems. And that's extremely important because that's how our online application and our technical assistance is maintained. Robert and Jenny, who are public information officers, making sure through social media and other forms of media that we get information about our programs out to you. And then Skylar, Mark, and Karen, who are actually working with the immediate ARPA team in terms of our grant application program. We also have an advisory council. One of our members on the call today was part of that advisory council, so it's great to see her this afternoon. Our advisory council is a citizens group, and they actually provide input into our small business as well as our nonprofit program. So the individuals that you're seeing on this slide, they'll be meeting and going over every one of these applications with our team members from Greene County. So they've got a very, very big job because we're expecting well over 100 nonprofit applications to come in. And we'll be going through all of those as we make our decision-making process going into the fall and late fall of this year. So if you're seeing them in the community or you know them, thank them for their work. And they're also very supportive in terms of helping us to make sure we understand the community priorities, and they take their jobs very, very seriously. They've already been engaged in the small business program and CIP program. So I think most of you know this, that the ARPA funds are a part of the American Rescue Plan Act, which was passed by Congress. Greene County has almost $57 million, and all of that allocation Greene County has received, and we've already begun to actually award these funds out in several different initiatives. Some of you have heard of our Community Impact Program. I know some of the organizations on the call even applied for it. So that was a major initiative in which we funded transformative projects for our community. Many of those are capital projects which are beginning in our community now. And then we've also funded our small business program. The first aspect of that took place earlier this year, and we're still going through some of those small business applications now in terms of just funding them with the actual check support. And now we have launched our nonprofit application program. So all of this is part of how we've allocated part of that $57 million just about. I know some of you were part of our nonprofit listening sessions, which we conducted in the summer of 2021, but we had a very deliberate needs assessment process, which included a community survey, which over 1,700 residents participated in, as well as our nonprofit listening sessions. We also were very mindful of the census update, as well as our community reports that we have available in Greene County, looking at the red flag items. So all of that was incorporated into what we know as our need assessment. That needs assessment is also available under the Greene County ARPA tab. These are the top priority categories that came out of the needs assessment. I think these would be very recognizable to all of you in the nonprofit community. And we're showing this as part of the workshop today because we ask that you keep these in mind as you think about what applications you're making and how you're applying. These are things that the county sees as top priorities. Again, you can read that full needs assessment under the Greene County ARPA tab. It's also divided by Springfield and Greene County, but also each one of our separate municipalities, we can show the top priorities. But this is the overall priorities for the county. Obviously, there are some that you as the nonprofit community would not be applying for example, number 7 and number 9, because there are specific programs from the state of Missouri that actually can address those. So we do just ask you to recognize and to state if your proposal actually relates to one of our needs assessment categories. But I think most of you know by now, in terms of the ARPA legislation, there are actually 66 different eligible categories. So all of your applications, we will be citing and scoring them based on that they fall into one of the ARPA eligible categories. So I think all of what you do should probably fall into one of the categories. And so we'll be looking at those. And that full list of ARPA eligible categories is available under the ARPA tab in terms of one of the links. And one of our team members will show you that as we go through the workshop today. And then these are the funding buckets. Again, all of this is on our Greene County ARPA tab, the total award. Our commissioners have held back about 10% in reserve, and those are contingency funds. As we go through all of our programmatic allocations, they may look at the reserve for additional or emergency types responses. And then you'll see that the countywide, those are projects which will be in conjunction with our municipalities, our first responders. We put money under the community, which is the small business and nonprofit. And then the collaborative funds those were our CIP programs, or the Community Impact Program. Just because I'm sure you're wondering, for the nonprofit program, this particular round, we have approximately $5.9 million that is being allocated for this round in 2022. We do envision another round of nonprofit funding in 2023. So these are the specifics: $5,910,000. This is for the current round that you'll be applying for. We're doing something a little bit different for this particular round of applications. We are doing a tier process. We are dividing the grant awards into 3 tiers: Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Applicants are encouraged to apply for a grant amount no more than 20% of their operating budget. So the idea here, and just backtracking real quickly, our Community Impact Program awards were grants $500,000 or $500,000 and above. So our nonprofit application program, which this is now, these will all be awards that are less than $500,000. But because we want to try to have an equity focus for this, we actually want to divide the applications based on the size of the organization, your organization budget. So you'll be competing against similar organizations in terms of your budget size. We also have taken the advice of our advisory council and what I would call a best practice. We are asking applicants to apply for a grant amount no more than 20% of their operating budget. This is designed so that you are applying for a grant that's consistent with your capacity in terms of your operating budget, and making sure that you're able to do this in a way that's going to benefit our community and will be handled in an expeditious manner. So you can certainly ask us questions about that, but that is the plan that we're utilizing. So you'll apply on the grant application in the specific tier that you're eligible for. And then you'll be competing within your own individual tier for the grant awards. So for example, our advisory council and our internal team, we will actually total all the grant applications requests from Tier 1. And then they will compete against each other. Same thing for Tier 2, same thing for Tier 3. Now, just in case you're wondering, we have not determined yet how we will allocate the $5.9 million in terms of the 3 funding tiers. We will make that decision once we see what the total request is by tiers. I recognize that I'm saying a lot, but if you have more specific questions, we will take the time in terms of our workshop today to go through those particular matters. Okay, and then the most important thing down at the bottom, all grants will be made on a reimbursement basis. We will speak more to that, but the general idea is you've spent the funds for the programs that you're doing, and then you get the reimbursement. So this is a reimbursement grant. There may be some situations where you have already provided some forms of this service over the past year. And so once you are awarded a grant, if you're successful in getting a grant, you may be able to turn in some of the receipts for funds that you've already spent immediately upon the fact that you are awarded a grant and you've got your grant agreement. Cindy Stein's office, the auditor's office, will be working in terms of those kind of specifics, but we can go into more detail about that as well. I would advise 20% of your budget in Greene County. Looking at questions in the chat, and yes, the slides will be made available on our Greene County ARPA tab. Thank you for those questions in the chat. We can keep going. So the last thing probably in terms of my comments, and then I'm going to be turning it over to our team members for other specific sections of our workshop today, is to just make sure people are aware that there is an equity lens that we're looking at. And equity focus is very specific in the ARPA legislation, and our county commissioners are supporting this in terms of our nonprofit program here in Greene County. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on all facets of our community, but at the same time, we also recognize there's been a disproportionate impact on specific or some demographic groups, and it's exacerbated health inequities amongst racial, ethnic, and social economic lines. So these are things completely from the actual legislation. So those of you who are providing programs and services in specific low-income communities, and obviously we're all aware of the poverty impact here in Greene County. We want to know that. We want to know how you are reaching those communities, how you are addressing those disparities. That's of great interest to us. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Skylar, who's going to go through the next section of our workshop this afternoon.
All right, thank you, Dr. Foster. Skylar here. So first things first, I think it's rather important that we show you guys how to actually access the nonprofit application. So I'm going to, step by step walk you guys through how to get to the application, as well as finding important resources and documentation that we have available for you to assist you when completing the application. So first thing I just want to point out here is we have 2 links. The first one just goes straight to our Greene County homepage. That's where we'll be going here in a second. But I just also want to point out the second link here will take you directly to our application portal, where you will get started in your registration process and then beginning your application. So let's first of all go to the Greene County homepage. All right, so here we are at the Greene County homepage. What you guys will be looking for once you get here are our tabs here, just a little bit down the page. And what we'll be looking for here is the orange American Rescue Plan Act tab. So I'm going to click on that. And you can see quite a bit here in the drop down. Of course, all of this information is quite useful for you guys to learn just a little bit more about the ARPA legislation in general. First thing maybe I want to point out here is under general information, you will be able to find the first workshop we recorded. Of course, this second one will also be posted. So that should be and could be useful to you guys. But also I want to point out at the second half of this drop down is kind of where we'll be focusing, and that's the nonprofit application. So the first thing, probably the second thing we want to get looking at here is the nonprofit application criteria. So I'll go ahead and bring this up. All right, here we are. This is a pretty handy page. I would encourage anyone about to fill out the application to go here first. It's rather important just to get an idea whether or not you are eligible for this funding opportunity. So this would, of course, be a great place to start. One of the key takeaways for this document, I would say, would be nonprofit classification. Several concerns have been brought up to us since this application period has started, and that is, is our nonprofit application, eligible for this funding opportunity based on our, tax classification, and that is whether you are a 501c3 or not. All nonprofit applications will have the opportunity and are welcome to apply for this grant funding. Yeah, and Dr. Foster, you can speak to that if you'd like.
Yeah, we've had several organizations ask us because we understand under the 501 501c IRS designation, there are different categories: 501c6, 501c4, 501c19. And so we're just making kind of a blanket statement that if you are a nonprofit organization, you recognize that, you've got that classification, you are more than welcome to apply to the Greene County nonprofit program. So you do not have to be a 501c3 specifically. If there's a case that your designation is something that's something we want to look at more carefully, we'll certainly let you know, but you're welcome to apply. We just want to make sure that that's very clear, because we've had several questions about that.
All right, thank you, Dr. Foster. All right, so next, we're going to be checking out the nonprofit application user guide. And we'll go back to the American Rescue Plan Act tab. And that is the next link just after the criteria. We'll go ahead and check out the user guide. And this is a handy tool when going through the application, just because in this document we address each question we ask in the application and provide more insight to really what we're looking for. And so, of course, this will be handy for you. The first couple of paragraphs in this document kind of walk you through finding the application itself. So that's kind of what we're doing here, but just in case, you forget, the beginning of this document will walk you through finding the application itself and, where to get registered and so on. So as you can see in this document, like I mentioned before, we kind of go into the specifics of what we're asking you. Something I wanted to touch on here a little bit more is in section 5 of our application, and that addresses the tiers that we have. Sorry, I think I missed it. All right, okay, here we are. Yeah, and we're just going to touch here a little bit more on our tier system. Of course, Dr. Foster addressed this a little bit in our PowerPoint, but of course we have the largest, middle, and lowest tier. Those are tiers 1, 2, and 3. We've just, in this document, provided another way to kind of look at this in this second section. So if you're kind of wondering which tier you will be, competing in, you can look at this second list of tiers, and it kind of shows based on your operating budget, whatever number that might be. That's just a good way to determine where you're at in terms of tiers. And then Dr. Foster, is anything else you would like to?
I think that's good for now.
Okay. All right. Moving on. All right, now probably what all of you guys have been waiting for, we'll kind of get started on the nonprofit application itself. So to find the nonprofit application itself, you're going to go back to the tab, American Rescue Plan Act tab, and you see right here it says nonprofit application. That's not just a heading for this section, it is the actual link to the portal. All right, and so now I will hand things over to Mark.
Hello, everyone. Let's get the mouse. Perfect. So like Skylar said, this is going to be the homepage for the nonprofit application. In this homepage, you will have similar descriptions that you would have seen in the criteria and in the user guide. If you happen to miss those documents, this would be a helpful reminder to make sure that your organization is eligible and complies with all of our criteria. If you have any questions about your organization's status, make sure to reference these statements. Additionally, down here, you would see some of the requirements that you might engage with in the application. And down here at the very bottom is a post-project grant report. This could be accessed right now to give you a reference to the types of questions we might ask after this grant project is over. However, the questions in this report are subject to change. Right now, it's there to serve as a helpful reference to see what Greene County might require of you later down in the process. So I'll go back up to the top. And if you're a new user, the very first thing you would do is click register. You provide the simple contact information, provide a password, and then as long as your email is not currently in use in our database, you will have created a new account. I have already created one, so I will go to the left side. And this is also the same area where if you're returning to your application, you would sign in. So I'll provide my account information. And then click sign in. And then since I had already started one, it brought me back to the home page. Normally it would take you to this page, my account, and you would see your applications. I have several right now because I was testing the site. You probably won't have 3. For you, you would start with the create new application, and then it would bring you into the application process. I'll start right here, which is my test one. Okay, perfect. So this is the start of the application. your screen would pop up with the very first section, qualifying criteria. These will look very similar to what you experienced in the first page. Simple reminder that you understand that your organization meets these criteria. So you would select all of these boxes and they would show that you are in compliance with these criteria. And this is true for all sections. Once you are done, you can click save and continue and it will take you to the next section.
Mark, if you don't mind, let's see what's in the chat in case it's a question that applies to something we've already gone over.
Okay, this is the next question.
Only Tier 3 is eligible for a 2-year funding, and I will explain that once Mark goes through the application.
And then this next question down here, Tier 1.
Well, when you're asking the question, is it the largest tier? The largest tier in terms of the funding awards is actually Tier 1. We anticipate we'll probably get more applications in Tier 3 just because more organizations in our Greene County tend to be smaller in size. Thank you for the chat questions. Okay, Mark.
Perfect. So we just completed section 1. We're back on section 2 now. And this is standard information for your organization. You work through each question, providing information for your organization. And if at any time you have questions about what we are asking, to the right side here is that same user guide Skylar just went through. Feel free to bring that up and reference it while you're answering the application. Or if you need immediate assistance, feel free to use this contact information to get a hold of either Skylar or myself, and we can provide immediate assistance while you're working on the application. So we're back in section 2. We're working through the standard information for your organization. Here's organization operating address. And there's an important note there. And this should be information that your organization has readily on file. Down here is our first free response question where you describe your purpose or mission. This is true for the rest of the application. Any free response question is limited to 500 words per answer. We feel that you would be able to succinctly summarize your answer within this box. If you have any further descriptions that you need to provide, you could email us those answers. However, we think you could summarize your project and the purpose of your organization for most of these questions in 500 words or less. So you would type your responses there, continue to work through the application. And this is about the location of your organization. There are a few questions throughout the application where if you select an answer that says if your organization is outside Greene County, there will be a please explain box. This would help us make sure that in some circumstances, if you might not be on paper in compliance, we could see what those circumstances are to make sure we have an explanation for all potential answers. So you continue to work through the application, providing the necessary information. This question is important. It's asking you to provide one of the following: a DUNS number, a TIN number, or a UEI. If your organization has a UEI, please defer to that option. That means that you have a project registered through sam.gov. Further here, number of employees. Point of contact is important. It is very possible that we might reach out to your organization for further information to either clarify some details or get further information if an answer was not fully answered. This is somebody that we could reliably get in contact with if needed. Let's see, we have a question in the chat. Okay, for the question for the post-award reporting questions, that will be in the home page of the application at the very bottom. If you click on the hyperlink, you'll bring up the PDF where you can see the types of questions we might ask. That's a good question. All right, now we're done. We're moving on to section 3. This is asking about the employee demographic information of your organization. As it says here in this info box, this section is optional. As Dr. Foster mentioned in a slideshow, the ARPA legislation is interested in providing an equity component, and this type of information would help us see who we are serving and what types of organizations we are serving. Now, if you do not want to answer, you can simply click this prefer not to answer, and it will save section 3 and advance you to section 4. If you do want to provide this information, please provide in percentages the racial makeup of your employees and then the gender makeup of your employees. And then that'll be save and continue. The same information is true for the clientele demographic information. However, this section is required. We are interested in seeing what types of people your organization serves. And these are the same questions that will ask for the racial makeup of your clientele and the gender makeup of your clientele. Theoretically, this should add up to 100%. If you're ever unsure about anything, you can just place a number here in this percentage to make sure that your numbers add up. We understand if it doesn't, it does not have to. We aren't all math people. And this is the meat and potatoes, the most important section of the application is the application overview. This is where you will begin to describe the project you are seeking grant funds for. Once again, we provide a description of our funding tier system to help guide the size of your proposed request amount. And here it's further described what tiers are eligible for, who you'd be competing against. And I know there was a question about the 2-year funding cycle. Here's another description if you want to speak on that.
Sure. I want to just explain briefly why we have considered the 2-year funding cycle. This is really part of our desire to help support those really small organizations in our community that in many cases are serving an underserved or underrepresented pocket within the community. So we recognize when we apply that 20% operating budget formula, it may mean that the amount of total funding for a very small organization would be fairly small. For example, if an agency had a budget of $15,000 and they're restricted to that 20% component, so that would represent about a $3,000 grant award. But at the same time, if they're really hitting something that is really critical in terms of our COVID-19 pandemic response, we would like to have an ability to work with them over a 2-year period to in fact enhance that grant award a little bit larger. So that's why we're looking at in some cases a 2-year award so that they can get more money but have that over a longer period of time because of the nature of what they're doing and how that important it is in terms of a needed service in our community. But again, because of just their budget size and what the grant award size is, it's not going to be what we might describe as a very large amount of money, but in many cases, it might be significant to them in terms of what they're able to do. And then also because of the reimbursement nature of the actual grant process, it gives us a chance to work with them as well and help to develop their capacity. So there's a little bit of what we might describe as a capacity building component to this grant application process as well, so that some of our smaller organizations, we don't want another pandemic, but as there are other opportunities and other ways throughout the community, the next time maybe there'll be a larger budget and they can get, more services, more funding to help those segments of the community that they are working with. Thanks, Mark.
Absolutely. So like we said earlier, this is where you put your requested total amount, and it should comply with the restrictions here from their tier system. Next, you provide a description of your proposed project, keeping in mind that it is capped at 500 words. We have a couple of questions in the chat real quick. Ooh, see that question, Dr. Foster, right here. The scoring criteria.
The demographic should be for your Greene, to the extent that you can, for your Greene County services. Thank you for the question. Yes, only Greene County.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is also an important question. We recognize that the constituents you serve might have been impacted in different ways and might have requested a certain project. Here's your opportunity to describe the specific need for the project that you're seeking funds for. Here's a drop-down question. Is this a new, existing, or changed project? We recognize that if these funds are approved, the nature of your project might change. So if you have a new project, a capital project, or a new initiative, a new outreach, you would select a new project. This is an ongoing project that you need continued funds for. This would be the option for you. And this is a project that would be altered in some way by the sudden increase in funds from the grant program.
Can I speak to that briefly, Mark?
Absolutely.
So I've had this question from a few organizations. We've all learned this great word during the pandemic, pivot. In fact, we kind of talk about the pandemic pivot. We know that there are some organizations, as a result of what's occurred in our community, you may have either modified an existing service or started a new program. In the case where this program does not have a specific funding source, I'll just say something hypothetically. So maybe you're doing a mobile kind of food pantry and you're just doing this with donations. And this is something that you've actually just started in the last 6 months. Okay, so you recognize this has been successful, it's needed, people really appreciate what you're doing. So now you apply for this from this particular program, you get funded. So the amount of money that you have receipts for and can document that you've spent, you could utilize that to actually get reimbursement as part of your grant award. And then when Mark was referring to maybe modifying it, but at the same time, perhaps you also notice there's another component that you'd like to add because of what you've seen in terms of feedback from the customers that you're serving. So that's part of maybe how you are modifying a new program. But the key for these programs to be, they're not being funded by any other source, and you would like this Greene County ARPA funds to help support that. So there are cases where you've actually been doing something during the eligible grant period time frame that you can actually get reimbursement for, as long as you can document that with receipts, etc. So if you were funded for that, so that would give you the amount of money that you spent, reimbursed, and as long as that doesn't exceed your grant award, then you'd have money to do additional services in that funded category.
Comments?
Yes. The funds are for Greene County programs serving Greene County people. Other county has funds. Reporting also be about Greene County. Yes, so reporting would be about what Greene County is for. Yes, and other counties, other cities do have funds, but as I said at the offset, not every community, unfortunately, may be funding a nonprofit type application process. And again, yeah, all of the services are only for Greene County residents in terms of the funding base. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. So this will be the next question: who will benefit from this proposed project and how? If you are unsure, you're always free to take the best guess, but we prefer it to be evidence-based and in line with previous projects that your organization has completed. The next question, once again, feel free to estimate based on past predictions of similar projects to see how many individuals or families will be served. And then to your best guess, what percentage of those are residents in Greene County, Missouri. This is another free response question. How will these funds help you respond to or recover from COVID-19? And this next section will also address that, but the legislation has several different expenditure categories in which your project might align with. These are expected to help guide your project and see the best ways that you can respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, either through any of these three options: the negative economic impacts, public health emergency, or responding to disproportionately impacted communities. Your project could respond to one or all three of these. Select the one that best matches with your project. Similarly, in this drop-down question, these are just a small handful of the types of expenditure categories outlined by the U.S. Treasury. You recognize these might be the most popular categories that your projects would align with. However, if your project is outside of these expenditure categories, please select other, and in one of the free response questions, describe which category you think your project best aligns with. These are similar yes/no questions. If at any time you select a no to these questions, we would ask for an explanation to see the reasoning behind those choices. And then down here, and this might be another question that will be brought forth in the post-project grant report, but we do have to ensure that the funds are used in accordance with the ARPA Eligible Guidelines. And here you would enumerate the ways that your organization would ensure that you are in compliance at all times. Down here is an important question. It is the estimated total project cost. It is certainly possible that the project you are seeking funding for exceeds $500,000. If that is the case, you can detail here the total project cost, keeping in mind that in the question above, that is capped, by your tier limit. Here you would describe if your organization has received any other federal funds for this project, and down below in the supporting documentation, the section where you can attach those receipts.
Special delivery from Jennifer.
I'm sorry, is there a question? Okay.
Now go to the right, top right corner. Should do a right click on it.
All right, I think it's quiet, so we'll continue to proceed. This will just resolve itself there. This question is similarly important If your project will require long-term maintenance, what are the steps that your organization would take? As this is a one-time funding opportunity, we recognize that the project might extend beyond 2022 or 2023. We are interested in the steps your organization would take to make sure that the clients continue to be served, or the project, if it additional funding sources, will continue to be funded. These are similar compliance questions to make sure your organization is eligible for federal funding. And down here are questions targeting the equity component of the legislation to see how your organization's project would serve those individuals most impacted by COVID-19. And that is the conclusion of section 5. In the next section, it begins to ask about the supporting documentation. These are all required. Whenever you select a file to upload for any of the required documentation, it will bring you to your computer's file explorer, where you can attach a PDF or similarly accessible file of that specific documentation that we are requiring. So here is our nonprofit determination letter, IRS Form 990, SOS nonprofit registration, current board of directors roster. Here's a board member certification form. This is verifying that all board members of your organization recognize that you are seeking federal funding, and there is a template that you can follow if needed. And then a current financial statement from your organization. Give it a check. Look there in the chat, have some questions. Okay. Yes, all of the free responses are capped at 500 words. Good question. Yes, the drop-down menu should allow a user to select more than one expenditure category, as we recognize those projects may meet the requirements for different expenditure categories. And the next question.
Mike, which organization are you with?
I'm with the Watershed Committee of the Ozarks.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I might need to talk to you offline, but I would say generally what our advice has been, if there's a collaboration we're looking for, and we actually encourage collaboration. We think that's a very welcome approach to the grant application process. But we would just, to date, we've been advising that there be a lead organization, and then that lead organization describe the role of the other organizations within the single application.
Okay,
So
that sounds good.
Beg your pardon?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, but feel free to contact me or members of the team offline as well in terms of some of the specifics. But generally, we're encouraging one application from a collaboration approach.
You see these things too.
Yes, currently awardees. I love how nonprofits are just love to think about the future, and I know you have to. So you're asking about the next round. Yes, our internal conversation so far, we certainly envision if you got funded in this round, you could apply for a round in 2023. Yes. And yes, for Jeffrey Smith's question about the Secretary of State.
The current financial statement question, do you see that one?
No.
It's right there.
Well, I would. Cindy Stein may say different, but I'm thinking that you're 2021 because obviously you're still in. Depending on what your fiscal year is, your last fiscal year statement is what I'm thinking. If Cindy Stein is still with us, she certainly can speak to that differently if that would be the case, since you're still in your current year.
This is about multiple projects in one application.
I need to unmute myself. Lyle, I would concur with that the most recent fiscal financial statement is what they'd be looking for.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And then I think that was a question about multiple applications in support of two organizations. Again, I would encourage you, Ben, to submit one application and to just describe those two programs. And I'm not suggesting, Ben, that this is what your approach is, but we've had that question come up several times, and we want to be just to caution organizations that you need to stay within your funding tier guidelines or restrictions. And so sometimes that's just a concern that multiple applications may be a way of trying to come around the funding tier restrictions. So I think our teams and our advisory council, as long as you're clear and succinct about what you're applying for, we can sort out the multiple or different programs that you're requesting, because we recognize there are many different ways we want to respond currently.
Combined expense totals for each project.
Yes, combined expense totals, Tanya. And your question, you guys have lots of questions. We love that. That's fine.
I'll address that.
Jeff's question, yes, that's different from your financial statement because I'm interpreting your question about the budget and expenditures to be, I'm reading this that you're asking about what you're actually are applying for. But your financial statement is just like Cindy Stein just stated, is really your last current financial statement from your fiscal year for the organization.
For the question about the success story, that is a guide to the post-project grant report, so it would not be on this online application.
Thank you for your next question, Ben. I would say for all of our organizations, we want to see the pandemic impact referenced in your application because the ARPA grant legislation is in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So foremost for all of our work is how are we and how have we been impacted by the pandemic as an organization, and how is what we're proposing to do responding. I recognize that we have, nonprofits, and it's wonderful from many different facets and many different types of services. But even if you're an arts or culture organization, your annual fundraiser could have been impacted. Your giving may have been impacted. So there needs to be that tie into this is how the pandemic has impacted us. Maybe in some cases you have more people than you've ever imagined because your services have been needed more. So that needs to be the pandemic reference in your program description and your application. Yes, and I know you're saying it's only 2 weeks away. That's correct. The applications are due September 14th. The application period started a week ago, so there was a 3-week or is a 3-week application timeline. And we understand that, in some cases you'll be doing your best guess estimate. That is perfectly okay. We know this is not down to a science. So give us your best estimate of what you're proposing to do in the time that you're submitting the application. Multiple projects under one application will be judged together. So please do not quote me, but I think in discussions with our internal team and as well as the advisory council, we would anticipate if XYZ nonprofit is proposing to do 4 different types of services, we will simply, if we feel that all 4 of those services are valid or fundable or 3 of the 4, then we would actually make the award in the specific categories. I know some of the organizations that are on the call today were certainly funded in our CARES program. And I know Cindy Stein and Angie Cruz and her very, very capable staff have this come up many, many different times where, in fact, I think in CARES we even have multiple applications, but they combine those into one different grant award. Please keep in mind that as part of our ARPA, these are federal funds. So Cindy Stein's office in Greene County, they will have to, they'll have to execute. I hate to use that word. They'll have to create or give you guys a grant agreement. These are federal funds. So there are very specific procedures in terms of how these funds are awarded. So that grant agreement is going to spell out the amount of funds and the categories in which those funds are actually being spent in. So actually your example is actually perfectly fine because again, there are 66 categories of ARPA eligible funding categories. So we would basically say you're doing food pantry, you're doing rent assistance. I know we got ERAs, that's not the best example, but whatever your categories are, and these are the ARPA eligible categories that correspond. And then you would have the actual grant money in that category that has been awarded to you by Greene County. And the grant agreement would then reflect that. So that would be the agreement that Cindy Stein's office, the auditor's office, put together, and then your organization will be responsible accordingly. And that was done for those of you who got CARES funding. You all got those grant agreements, and they actually, in most cases, if there were multiple applications, put those back into one single grant agreement. That's just a more efficient way from an audit process to handle it and to just keep track of what your organization is doing. What we didn't say earlier, and why we were asking for some of those demographic characteristics, because these are federal funds, And this is a different administration than when we had the CARES. Just letting us get the reporting going again. We have very specific reporting requirements that we have to give back to the federal government. And depending on the amount of money that you're awarded, we have to report those that information back to the federal government. So these are things that not only as a recipient, but these are things that are required of us. So that's why we're asking for the information so that we might be able to say Greene County served X amount of people and these were, and we will describe the amount of the people that we served with the ARPA funds. We have to give an account back to the federal government, how we allocated the funds and what those funds accomplished within our communities. Thank you.
I believe we were last on the current financial statement. And like Dr. Foster said, that'll be the last completed statement of the fiscal year for your organization. And I know there was a question in the chat about receipts for eligible project. This would be for something that you've completed since March 3rd, 2021. If you're seeking reimbursement for an eligible expenditure project that your organization has completed, this is where you would attach the receipt for that project. And down here, I know there's also a question about where to potentially attach a detailed budget. If that's something you want to attach, the supplemental attachment options provide you an option to give more information about your organization or more information that you feel is relevant to the strength of your application. Once all of those are attached, you would select Save and Continue. And down in section 7, it is an overview of all the questions that you've completed throughout the application. It'll make sure that all the questions are complete and accurate to the best of your knowledge. If you detect anything that you want to change, you're more than welcome to go back up in the application and make any edits. And also at any time while you're completing the application, if you need additional information, you can save and continue at a later date, and that will save at the section that you last completed. So say I last completed section 4. Always make sure to select Save and Continue or Save Only if you want your progress to be maintained. And then when you next sign on to the application portal, you'll be able to continue that application from where you last left off. And I believe that is the completion of the application. Like we said, if you have any questions, you can always call us or email us. We understand that there are some technical questions and it might be difficult at times, but we hope that this application is rather straightforward and that with any assistance that we may provide, you can complete it to the best of your ability.
I know we've got a few more questions in the chat, but I want to thank Skylar and Mark for their work today for the workshop. And those of you who actually received CARES funding, I recognize many of you that are on the call today, and I really appreciate everybody's patience because this is a lot of information. But one of the things we did after the CARES program, our internal team, we kind of evaluated and learned from that experience. So one of the things you'll note in this application, we are trying to get as much information as possible from you submitted with the application. So Cindy Stein's office in particular won't have to ask you for all of these things after the fact. So we're trying to get as much as we can in your initial application. So that's why you're seeing a number of things that we want to have you upload, even including possible receipts if you get funded for something that you already are doing that you don't have another fund source for. So I just wanted to say that to help you understand why you see this, and then that means there'll be less they have to ask you for if you are funded. Matching funds are not required, and I want to be careful how I say this. There may be in a case of a few of your organizations where you may be having some matching funds and the ARPA funds will be used for a match. You can let us know that. There may be some opportunities even along with that, but that's kind of going into another area right now. But no, we're not requiring matching funds. The demographic info for is for the program that you're asking funding for. And the application can be for a capital project. Thank you for that question. That's a really good question because this is one of the major differences with the ARPA funding from the CARES funding. Most of you will recall that CARES funding initially was for 6 months. It was extended, so capital projects were not allowed. With the ARPA funds, there is a longer time frame allowed in the legislation. So you can ask for a capital project and we will look at that essentially on a case-by-case basis.
For this question about the ARPA eligible expenses, there is a link right below the drop-down bar in the application. If you go to that link, you'll see the full list of the expenditure categories. And if you want to see a detailed explanation for all the expenditure categories, you would search ARPA eligible expenditure categories, and the Treasury has several different documents detailing those different categories.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, Mark, because yes, believe it or not, all of the ARPA legislation, some of you who like to go into a lot of detail, you actually can find all of this online, down to every specific iota that you can just discover the legislation. Some of it's actually very interesting, so feel free to look at that as well. Yeah, this project only serves Greene County, only serves Greene County residents. That was intended for organizations who may be serving residents in other counties. We just want to be clear that your funding and that your answer should only apply to those percentage of your total clients that are from Greene County. Yes, for Colby, your question about salary costs, the answer would be yes. Thank you for being kind saying that, Marissa. Yes, we're trying our best. And I know this was a lot in an afternoon, so we really appreciate your patience. I know some of you may come up with questions that you wish you had asked later. Again, feel free to email us or call us. We'll be doing technical assistance each morning this week and next week. Again, applications are due September 14th. There will be no extensions as far as we know at this time. So please get your applications in. Ask for if you have questions. No question is too small or minor to ask. We welcome your questions. We want to work with you. And I would also request, if you know of other organizations who may not know about this funding opportunity, feel free to let them know. Send them a link. Send them a link to the application. We want our community to benefit from these funds. Our Greene County commissioners, they want to make sure we have a far reach, particularly even outside of Springfield and Ash Grove and Walnut Grove, and our communities outside of the city throughout Greene County. If you have friends, colleagues, family members who work or volunteer in other nonprofits, let them know that they can apply for these funds. We want to get the word out. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the kind things you're saying. Is there something you want to say, Scholar or Mark?
I just noticed there's maybe a couple more questions. A lot of some thank yous, but I think there was. Scroll up.
Oh, they're asking for the time, 10 to 12 a.m. the technical assistance hours for our ARPA team. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for all that you do. We really appreciate it. Have a good evening. Look forward to talking to you and to reviewing your applications. Have a great evening and a good rest of the week. Thank you again.